Ooh.
Wow.
Salvete mihi nomen est Stella et hoc est Backer the Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast, episode 215, the Studio Ghibli special for January MMXXII.
Ooh.
Backer the Oracle is brought to you by MileHighComics.com, your new and collectible comic book store. Mile High Comics has an inventory of over 5 million comics from the gold, silver, bronze, and modern age, and over 100,000 trade paperbacks. If you're not into the vintage stock, Mile High Comics also has a subscription service called the New Issue Comics Express, offering a discounted price for comics ready to hit the shelves. So if you're looking for vintage back issues or a great modern subscription service, be sure to check out milehighcomics.com. Well, I think my evil plan worked because years ago, I think when COVID started, I thought, what is the best way to grasp and pull Harry away from Donovan and make me the chosen one? And I thought, well, it's clearly watching some Miyazaki or Studio Ghibli films. And boy, has it been a journey, but here we are. So, with me now to go through this, and we'll talk about what this actually is. It's, as I like to call him, Harold or Harrison or Harry Chute. Welcome.
So presumptuous as to have so many names. But thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Of
And
course.
what I can't think of a better occasion than to do this than on Hayao Miyazaki's 81st birthday.
I know. I just saw that when I was scrolling through Instagram today. I thought we're recording on the perfect of days. So,
It's been
yeah, this
worth
is
it.
exciting. Hopefully, we will pay great respect and homage to him.
Yeah, hopefully, and then he'll be thankful to us, and as it should be.
Absolutely. I do want to say to start off that I want to also dedicate this episode to a pretty good friend, I would say, Zoom Yukinori. We had in the past had lots of conversations about these films and then any other anime film that I may have popped across my radar and I watched. He may have seen it and we discussed it. And we had a thought of doing a similar episode like this, but unfortunately he passed away. So this goes out to Zoom. Okay. So what can you explain what we've been doing exactly? Why did this begin? Because we didn't intend for this show necessarily to happen, right? Like we were just
Right.
having fun during COVID isolation times
Mhm.
watching, which I had fun because, I picked some of my favorites, but he put them low on his list, which so you'll never see how low they are. That's how low they are. But yeah, we just started watching them and I think it was you probably did. You come up with an idea of a crossover of sorts.
Yeah, maybe. If this double crossover episode goes poorly, then I guess we know who to blame.
I see.
Um, for my part, I hadn't really seen any of these Studio Ghibli movies. I'd seen a handful, some of the essential ones, but Stella appeared to me bathed in light as a Ghibli aficionado, and I think she's seen all of them, with exceptions being maybe some of the movies that they just produced and distributed, like the Red Turtle. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I haven't seen
Um,
that one yet.
well, it didn't make our cut, although I think it might be available on HBO Max. And that was the other thing, the timing there, that these movies have always been out of print for me, which either means that I didn't know to look for them, or they were just more relatively expensive than other anime DVDs. So I don't have any physical copies of these. So now that they're all mostly on HBO Max, with one glaring exception, that being Grave of the Fireflies, we just kind of went through each one in a mostly random order. Um, and that was really nice. That was, yes, it was over beginning in I guess, the summer of COVID with Howl's Moving Castle, and then we just moved through them at a swift pace that, well, maybe not because it lasted over a year.
Yeah, but once we like locked down, hey, Wednesdays are the day at 8 p.m. that we meet up and watch them, then I think, did gain some good traction. There were some betrayals on both sides. I also was late sometimes because I went on a run like the hour before and I was like, I just need 10 minutes and then I'll be ready. But it's been a lot of fun, I think, to watch, oftentimes rewatch, but watching also for the new time, for the first time, it seems because you're watching with somebody and you would see things that I didn't notice, and I think vice versa. And then we always had a good discussion at the end of our watching and talking about it. You always ask me first, what do you think, which I never liked because I wanted to know what you thought
Oh,
first. But now I'm going to see what totally unvarnished, what you think of some of these. But yeah,
that's
it's been
right.
a lot of fun. So after they listen here, where can they go to see the second part of this crossover?
Yes, for the part two forthcoming, you'll have to check out witheyes.east.com. I suppose we'll have social media links because that's the only way that anybody is able to
Sure.
really do anything. And it'll be in podcast form. I don't know if you want to do a video for that, but we can discuss the logistics later, of course.
Sure. Yeah. So just to talk about what we're doing here, and then we'll actually get into Ghibli. And I should say that I pronounce it Ghibli and Harry pronounces it Ghibli. So
Oh,
just be
yes.
aware. I think it's like a GIF situation. And I thought, well, I guess I could go online and see what it is properly. But let's let the mystery just kind of sit there and I'll just sit in my ignorance. Who knows? But what we're doing, if you're fans of this show, then you hopefully have enjoyed and listened to the shipper specials that I do with Donovan every February, and where we usually pick a theme and then we do our top 5 of that theme and we alternate back and forth. So that is what Harry and I are going to be doing, where we've picked our top 5 Ghibli slash Miyazaki films because some of them weren't always associated with Ghibli, and we'll talk about why we've picked them and have a discussion. And so it's good because both of us have seen everything the other person has seen. Harry has no idea what my my list is. He's wanted to know for a very long time. His has been public the entire time, well, public to me, the entire time that we've watched these, because it's on a Google Doc where we kept track of what we had seen and what I had seen, what he had seen, and then he ranked them, to my chagrin sometimes, right in front of me. So I know what his top 5 are, but he's fished, pun intended. He's been fishing for my top 5 and I have not revealed. I think he just knows what my number 1 is, which I think many people know what that is, but okay. Well, do you want to begin and talk about just this studio and Hayao Miyazaki himself, and just give background to people who may not know who or what this is?
I suppose it all began 81 years ago today. Well,
Yeah, out of the womb, he immediately took to pen and paper.
yes. Well, if I was to do a biopic, I would do it sloppily and start there, way before the story begins. But I think in the case of a great artist like Miyazaki, you do begin rather early. And yeah, he was a mangaka, which I suppose just means a guy who makes manga, and animator very early on, pretty much with the evolution of Japanese animation itself. Some of his early works, I believe, were things like Animal Treasure Island, and actually a book that I have yet to open because I don't know. I think it might be in all Japanese. This one's called The Journey of Shuma, but
Mm,
if you can see, that's somebody who looks like Nausicaa.
it sure does.
And Studio Ghibli, it did not really begin with Studio Ghibli. I suppose it's a bit confusing, but Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, is kind of where we would first know of Miyazaki, I suppose, because that was the breakout success. That was a film from 1984 based on his long running manga. As you can see, my second prop of the day, I'm expending them all now. Uh, this is a massive volume that takes even my extraordinary muscles to lift with some strain, just 1, 2. But this is, I think I told Stella, if I had thrown this volume at you, you would die because it's just that big. So this is just what manga could do. They just write and draw forever. I don't know how they do it. Miyazaki is definitely one of the great talents. And yeah, yes, in adapting this film, uh, it was let's see, it was sorry, Tokuma Shoten Publishing Corporation, and which was the company that put out Nausicaa the manga. And then that same year, Studio Ghibli was founded, I believe, by Miyazaki Isao Takahata, and the third guy who I he's not mentioned here, but if you if you watch the documentary, he's the big time producer. The documentary being in the Kingdoms of Dreams and Madness. So I believe their first official movie after Castle Cagliostro and Nausicaa was Laputa Castle in the Sky, which I don't know that we'll be talking about today. Very much a thematic sequel to Nausicaa. And so, yes, I suppose the last piece of trivia for me is that Ghibli, the term, not Japanese sounding, I think it's a bit debatable where that comes from. Um, Apparently, it means hot wind blowing through the Sahara Desert, which was used during World War II by Italian pilots, referring to their scouting airplanes. And Miyazaki, of course, is a big fan of planes. And he says he wants to blow a sensational wind into the Japanese world of animation. And I believe Ghibli, which is the official pronunciation, is a misinterpretation of the Italian word, which is Ghibli, which I think is the sort of GIF confusion.
Yeah.
Um, and this information, this little tidbit, comes from Nausicaa.net. Um, and there are various histories that you can find online, but this is the one that I thought was interesting. Um, and I think that's all I have. Yeah, Heidi of the Alps, things like that. I think some of his earlier work is variously available. I think they're just now releasing Future Boy Conan or something like that. That I think he had worked on. I don't know. No, so now that I'm in the spotlight, it's I'm a little nervous.
Don't be nervous. Future Boy Conan, not Conan the Detective, is it? That's
I don't
something
think
different.
so. Isn't
Okay.
that funny? It's a different Conan. Maybe I'm getting
But his
the
name's Future
wrong.
Boy?
Yes, Future Boy. I assume that's some sort of Astro Boy derivative.
Potentially, yeah. I'm not sure. Interesting. Well, thank you. Thank you for that.
That was awful. Sorry.
Well, it gives people an idea of certainly who he is and everything. Do you I often see on Instagram in particular a quote. It pops up more frequently than I would like. And I've sent it to you where he says something about basically being a sad man.
Yes,
Is
people
there
on
yeah.
they love in particular juxtaposing him and Junji Ito, who's the great manga artist, very popular now, who does things like was a thing Uzumaki. He did one called Gyo Fish Attack, which was I don't know. And he's got the famous one where people go into the mountains and they say, "No, this is my hole in the mountain." Very scary stuff, actually. But he's like, when he's being interviewed, he's this happy guy. And Miyazaki, by contrast, makes very brightly colored, uplifting works that are very emotionally full. But he himself is a very sad, smoking man. And you can see behind the scenes footage of him working at Studio Ghibli. And when he's not sort of flipping through and drawing by hand all these things, he's just sort of hanging out on the balconies and smoking, always smoking, or making ramen and just being sad and talking about how everything is terrible. And he's a very interesting character for that and for everything else. He's put out a few books. I had one before I moved to LA, which I had to get rid of all my books, called Starting Point, and it was like from such and such year to the next, where he just has all these notes and talks about how much he doesn't like otakus and things like that.
Mm,
That's something else that's really attributed to him as well. The disdain for the popularization of anime.
interesting. Wow.
Kind of a
Yeah, it's
grump.
just really interesting to think how, yeah, he is creating some of these wonderful tales. And I mean, not all of them are uplifting, certainly. And I think when we get into some of these picks, we'll also talk about thematically some of the darker themes that are happening. There's a lot of anti-war, pro-environmental things, but you'd think he'd be kind of a jovial Santa Claus like man, but
You
he is
think?
not. He
You,
is
you,
not. Yeah. Well, I feel like also though, if you think about it, artists, I don't want to say all artists because I think that's probably lumping them together unfairly, but it seems like many artists are tortured inside, for their art, or perhaps that is the way that their art comes out. I'm just thinking about Van Gogh and I don't know if it was Picasso tortured, but just like there's something going on inside that's really hard to witness in a human being, but what they produce is really beautiful.
Right. Pagliacci.
Okay. Well, thank you for the history. So then my second thing is also history. What is your personal history with this studio and the man?
Honestly, it begins proper with you, Stella, so there's not much to
What?
tell. Um, I mean, I'd always known about Studio Ghibli, of course. My interest in anime is an outgrowth of my interest in science fiction, so I don't necessarily go through the catalogs of Crunchyroll anymore. That was more of an early 2010s thing with Kill la Kill, and for a moment I thought, ooh, I could be an anime fan, because that's what you aspire to, is to be, just instead of developing a personality and so on. So I knew about movies like Nausicaa and Princess Mononoke because they were genre films, and they were often on lists of critics who I admired and appreciated. So it was sort of a natural fit. I wasn't too interested in the greater catalog, in part because it was kind of beyond my reach. I don't know why exactly. Looking back, I couldn't say whether they were out of print uh, specifically, but um, things like Ocean Waves and Whisper of the Heart, they kind of just blended together as like the Studio Ghibli movies. Totoro was like, oh, it was a kids movie. I've been a kid for most of my life, and that was all about it being like, I'm not a kid, so I'm not going to be interested in these silly movies about giant woodland creatures bouncing here and there without a care. I think was it the Gummy Bears, um, and but eventually, I think I don't know. I honestly don't know what kind of turned it around. I think it was just you came in and said these movies mean a lot to me, and I believe I don't know if I'm speaking nonsense here, but I believe when we first started this, even our friendship was different. Like we maybe even got to know each other better throughout this experience. So things were a lot different, and I feel like I learned a lot about your media sensibilities through the Ghibli experience. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's actually not much of a story for me, unfortunately. I imagine it's something greater for you, but just in terms of like the scope of it itself, it really kind of began summer 2020.
Do you want to go back to that time in our friendship at the beginning? Do you know too much now?
No, um, I could that be correct? I don't even know. It's so hard to say. It's been such a blur.
I would agree with you. And I think it's something that Tom and I have experienced as well because we weren't just watching the films and I wasn't being, I mean, it was intimate in the sense of the first two films I'm showing you were ones that are really special to me. I'm showing you Hal and then Kiki. So there's that piece. And then we were having conversations too. So in the beginning, I think it was probably straighter, like we're watching the film and then we discuss it. But then as it went on, I think our call times were longer. And, we would just talk about our days in the beginning and then watch the film and then afterwards and probably also end up with our days. So I think yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it all blended together. And yeah, I think it didn't necessarily define our friendship, but I think it broadened it. And I would say that we are probably closer now than we were, yeah, a couple years ago when we weren't watching them for sure.
All thanks to Studio Ghibli.
All thanks to Ghibli. Yeah, I will honestly say, like, I've missed being able to hang out on Wednesdays at 8. I'm like, oh, this is sad. No Harry time tonight.
I
So
know. Well, we've made some overtures towards perhaps a horror movie marathon,
maybe,
but
maybe.
we're both too scared to actually start that.
Yeah, some of those Ari Aster ones. Well, we'll
Yeah.
see. Well, yeah, for me, I was actually trying to figure out which was the first one that I had seen. I was not an anime fan, not saying that I didn't like it, but I didn't seek it out. I think the first anime I'd ever watched, I didn't really even recognize being an anime because I was that young, and that's Speed Racer.
Oh,
And only when I recently, I guess in the past couple of years, got the complete series of Speed Racer, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the first anime I've ever watched. But I think I became aware of, without really knowing what it was, Ghibli was Spirited Away because that was in a theater that my mother really loves, and I enjoy going there as well. It's in a historical downtown part of Roanoke called the Grandin, and I remember it being in the main theater, and this must have been the time that it was, like, up for some big awards, and so that was like, "Oh, wow." So anime more so than just being a cartoon, is actually an art form and it can gain renown and everything. And so afterwards, I remember, I think, renting it or watching it probably from Blockbuster and watching it with my mom, watching Spirited Away. So I think that was probably the first one. And then in college, someone had watched, Howl's Moving Castle with me, and then from there, I think I did some research of other ones to watch, and Kiki was probably the next one. And I always like those top 10 lists that people do, like, what are the top 10 dot, 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 dot. So, of course, I went through and tried to watch as many as possible. Grave of the Fireflies once is enough for me. I wish I could talk about it more. I mean, I remember it being very good, but it's just so depressing that it's hard for me to think about watching it again, so I don't think I shall. And I ended up getting, I assume, a bootleg kind of compilation of all the films, and then if there are other ones that come out, which now it seems like G Kids also is just like a production company that's kind of associated with it, I take a chance, and sometimes the chance pays off and sometimes it doesn't. Like, only yesterday, I was like, "Well, it was an okay film." But I still, yeah, I can, there's some of them that I can watch, which will be on my list, that I could watch every week or so. And then there are other ones that I do like repeat viewings, but I need space in between because I get really, I don't know, involved with it. It's not necessarily, it's impactful, which there's one on my list that is like that, that I can watch it, but I would prefer not to watch it repeatedly because I think it just sits heavily with me. So it's been fun. I mean, these maybe might be the reason why I like anime a bit more. I always get upset when I offer, "Let's watch this," and then someone makes fun of it, but they like cartoons, and I don't really understand that differentiation, and some of them are a bit strange, but it's not like I start off with, well, Spirited Away, I think it's interesting that that one, it has, found such a big place because that one is pretty odd. Like, I wouldn't necessarily ask a first-time anime watcher to watch that, but something like Kiki is pretty safe. I mean, with the exception of having a witch flying around, so it's hard. Like, you put your, well, I put my heart on the line, like, saying, "Hey, let's watch this because it's my favorite," and then it's not received well. You're like, "Well, I don't know what to say." So this, I guess, lends into the next question of what is it for you that draws you to these films? What
I
made
think
you keep coming back every Wednesday to watch a new one?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I think there was probably only one moment where the both of us were watching one of these movies and felt this urge to be kind of like, like it was a really strange thing, and I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was in oh shoot, what is that movie called? The one with the human beings. What is it called?
Arietti?
Yes, the Secret World
Yeah.
of Arietti, where the boy character is who is a normal sized boy is talking to our hero Arietti, who's a little tiny bean, and she's talking about how her race is dying, and he's like, "Well, that's too bad. What's it feel like to be the last of your kind?" And he's just like, the direction, the acting
Yeah.
was just so bizarre. But yeah, I think honestly, for the most part, oh well, I mean, I wanted to ask you, like, I didn't realize that you watched these movies like a lot. I mean, was watching with somebody else, that's kind of like, is that like a special thing for you? Does it enhance the viewing experience? Because obviously there are some hazards.
Yeah, yeah, the hazards are thing. I would say it enhances. I mean, it's like I said, it's like an intimate moment, like, "This is a piece of me. Let's see how you react to it." So you're kind of on, I always assume everyone's going to like what I'm offering them because I'm not throwing out something that's like super controversial. But so it's fun, but then also it can be a bit sad. So when I see, Howl's Moving Castle way low on your list or Kiki's way low on your list, like, what happened to Harry to have him choose it like this? But
I
no,
swear I'm
yeah,
not.
so it can be a good experience, but it's better if someone's already open to viewing anime.
Right.
So
And I think to your question, the Ghibli movies tend to be pretty safe. You're right. Spirited Away is a strange one. I think when I showed my non-anime watching friend Akira for the first time, it was a bit too much.
Yeah.
And he told me recently, like, I'm just not into that anime stuff. I think remember that movie we watched that was like the anime movie. And so for Studio Ghibli, I think there's a nice kind of comfort or even security in knowing that there's a certain level of quality to expect each time a new one comes out. With two glaring exceptions, there really hasn't been a movie that at least there's been a consensus that it's bad, um, and even like or average. These are some of the best movies in general, not just animated movies, not just movies out of Japan. And so for me, I guess what I'm looking for, if a Studio Ghibli movie was to come out tomorrow, or if we're looking forward to Miyazaki's next movie, which is called How Do You Live, which I believe is something that Derek Zoolander says. Oh, that's a reference. Um, then I guess I don't know. I really I when I mentioned that I suppose I identify as a science fiction fan first in that way that we do. What I tend to look for in science fiction is not like the conventions of storytelling, like character, plot, or character or drama or something like that. I'm not expecting an emotional experience from something that was written by Isaac Asimov or something like that. I tend to be drawn to visuals and aesthetics, and that's led me down a lot of weird roads, especially in like video games, which I used to buy based on how cool the Space Marines looked, and so that's why I don't really play video games anymore. And so in Ghibli, like there's really I think almost exclusively, I don't think there's really a Ghibli movie that I look at and I'm just sort of like, ooh, that looks really cool in the way that I look at something like, um, oh gosh, I don't know. Well, Ghost in the Shell, which the second one is a Ghibli movie, as we may
I
discuss later.
refused.
That to me, it speaks directly to my visual sensibilities. It's cyberpunk and whatever. Studio Ghibli tends to have a softer, uh, fantasy sort of feel to it, which I have only come to appreciate uh, as an adult. Ironically, as a kid, I couldn't be bothered to watch anything that again felt like kiddie fare. And then as you discover when you watch these movies, they're very, they're age appropriate, but very, very deep emotionally. And so that's kind of what I learned to appreciate in retrospect.
Yeah, I think depending on when you're watching them, you'll be able to get more out of it. So
Yeah.
you could I think I would hesitate to show a child Mononoke
Oh, yeah.
or
Grave of
maybe
Fireflies.
well, definitely that. I was thinking about, Earthsea.
Yeah.
I would
Don't show
hesitate
anybody
maybe
Earthsea.
it takes such a dark turn at the end. But, yeah, so I'm not sure about that. Well, plus he murders his father. So I probably would hesitate to do that. But if you were to start in your teens and watch it, I think you would have an experience, and then it would only grow as you became older, which I think is true with me and some of these films that I have watched again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to that, I when I saw Spirited Away for the first time, I think it was 2018 or 2019. I was just so overwhelmed by it. It was the first Ghibli movie that I'd seen in theaters, but also in a long time. And so I went out and I was like, I gotta buy this movie for everybody. I think I bought a copy for my sister for that Christmas, and I bought a copy for my young cousins who would have been like, I don't know, like 3 and 5 at the time. And I was like, this is probably fine. In preparation for this podcast, I watched that movie last night, and yeah, I would have to say no. I think I made a mistake on that one. It's actually a little bit more intense than I remembered it. Not only for the beginning, where the parents eat so
Oh.
much that they turn into pigs, which actually frightened me, but also a scene later where the injured Haku in dragon form
Oh,
is just
right.
completely bloody, and the way he
Yeah.
sort of travels into the room, and it ends up looking like a scene out of Evangelion with the blood spattered everything, and so it's a bit more intense, but obviously PG rated as most of these movies are.
Yeah.
But a consideration.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, first and foremost actually, I don't know what's first and foremost because it's kinda battling. I'm not a strong fantasy, but then when I say that, I'm thinking Star Wars, I like Lord of the Rings, so maybe I am. I don't know if I necessarily go out I guess, like, literature-wise, I don't necessarily seek out fantasy, so maybe that's why I'm getting confused, but I like the fantasy elements within these. I like that some of them have a sense of whimsy to it as well, like, it's just fun, and a lot of them have like, I like the ones that have a weird coterie of characters, that they're not necessarily all humans,
Yeah.
which you'll see a couple of those on my list. And the mythology that some of them have, I think even though Mononoke is not on my list, which I'm sure people might yell at that, "Why isn't that on your top 5?" I there are some visual elements there that I think we agree are, like, just so stunning. Like, the girl next to her mother, after she has tried to suck the bullet from her chest and you got the blood on like, that's usually what people know of Mononoke, and just from there, you'd be like, "Wow, that's really intriguing." And the mythology behind all of that was great. But I think a lot of things got muddied in that film, which I think I said in the midst of that one, I may have done this for a couple films, like we need to talk about motivation, character motivations at the end of this. And Harry and I stopped at the end and basically said, like, okay, why was this person doing this? To like figure it out. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the mythology behind it and just because you're just dropped in media race with many of these. And so there's like this background that you've got to figure out from characters doing whatever they're doing or exposition-y speeches maybe. And so that's a lot of fun. And nowhere have I seen a consistent studio pay great respect to creating and crafting these strong female characters. And that's something that really drew me to it. I think before I knew that I was really looking for that. But even more so now when I started to go through this with you, just seeing all these people, Kiki and Sophie and Mononoke to a certain extent, and Nausicaa
Mhm.
100%, and Theo and Porco. So just like these fun characters that they might be leads. There's so many leads I think that we saw might be like secondary lead characters or minor, but just how well they're presented and respectfully so that even within some of the time periods, you wouldn't think that would be true.
Right.
So that's something that also I really love about this man as well as this studio.
Yes, I think that was maybe part of our, or at least my shock with Lapita, which I really thought I was going to like, because that's my favorite anime director is a guy named Mamoru Oshii, who did things like Ghost in the Shell, the original, and wrote Jinro and a bunch of other famous things I can't even think of right now. But there was an interview where he talks about Miyazaki because they were colleagues and they trash talk each other all the time. And he says that his favorite of Miyazaki's movies was Castle in the Sky, Lapita. And so going in, I figured, well, my sensibilities and his line up, but I was really kind of underwhelmed by that, and I think maybe part of it was that lack of a strong central female character because she was a bit wispier than you would expect, and also a bit more flat in terms of a character. But that movie does have a central couple, and I think that that's probably another consideration for you going in that these movies tend to be pretty shiperific.
They do tend to be pretty chivalrific, and some of them I kind of want there not to be, like Mononoke. I feel
Yeah.
like just be on your own, Mononoke, I think you'll be okay. But, yeah, others that does certainly come into play, some of these relationships that pop up. Yeah, I actually watched today because it had been a long time since I had seen it. And it was before I really gained a love for Lupin the Third, the Castle Cagliostro, and it felt similar to Lapida, like, because
Oh.
he was trying to marry the princess, and, like, there was some sort of birthright, and there was some their family, the Cagliostro family, had the riches and everything. I thought, "This sounds like Lapida." But that didn't make my list either, I'm afraid.
Ah.
It
Well.
feels like a Lupin. It doesn't feel like a Miyazaki or a Ghibli. It's just like another Lupin that I've seen. So
Interesting.
yeah, I wouldn't say any specialness about it.
It also feels like every JRPG that you and I have never played because that segment of the video game world is kind of outside of our experience. But Donovan knows.
Yeah. Yes, very true. Do you have a preference between Japanese versus English when watching?
Yeah, I think that this issue has even taken on a new wrinkle in recent times. But for me, it's Japanese or no way. I think I probably saw Princess Mononoke dubbed for the first time because my ninth grade English teacher showed that to us. I don't know if it was in ninth grade or if it was senior year when she was back again, but I think that was probably the first time I'd ever seen one of these movies, and so it must have been dubbed for the kids. And then from there, I don't know when it kind of turned for me, but it was just it stopped being a question subs or dubs. I know that a lot of great work goes into dubbing, and a lot of those voice actors are really the most genial actors around who are willing to sort of talk to you on Twitter, perhaps. But yeah, for me, it's just I just prefer that original language, and also Studio Ghibli is interesting because it takes these celebrity roots. So you'll have like Christian Bale in what was that movie called?
How?
Howl's Moving Castle.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. And Claire Danes was in Princess Mononoke and all these things, and that can yield sort of interesting results. It helps, I think, for when you're showing these movies to a crowd who really is not into anime at all. So it can be like, oh, this is a Billy Bob Thornton movie, because that gets him every time. But Princess Mononoke also has Keith David, for example, playing with the boar god, and he's a veteran voice actor. So you do get interesting people in there. But no, for me, I go with Japanese every time.
Gotcha. I mean, this is separate from my, I guess, my anime lifestyle, because usually I prefer Japanese original, but for the Ghiblis, I enjoy the English voice casts, especially with, I guess, kind of the classic Ghibli films,
Yeah,
just because I think, really attracted to some of those actor well, actually, that's not true. I think it's just that that's where I first started, like, Hal was it was just shown to me in English, and then I think after that, I just looked to see, "Oh, who's in this? Oh, Kirsten Dunst is Kiki?"
yeah.
And I have fun with that. So, for me, I have the English. I will say with the sound clips that we will have in the podcast form of this episode, that they are in English so that people at least know what's going on. But, yes. Okay, so as we're leading up into it now. So then the big question is, how did you choose your top 5? This is similar to a question that I like asked every night that I watch a film with Harry about basically what do you look for? But how did you choose your top 5 as we're going into it? Is it a nostalgia, emotion, art, something more? Is there any method to your madness?
I think there's one on here that is nostalgia, but for the most part, it was a genuine reflection of the emotional response that I had to these movies at the time, and I just had to be honest about that. I One of these movies, the last one we watched actually was Ponyo, which I had pretty high up for the longest time. I'd seen that like maybe when like a long time ago, closer to its release than now. And I remember really liking that, but I don't think I'd seen it in full until we watched it a few weeks ago. And so that was kind of maybe a borderline cheat, but it was confirmed that oh yes, no, this one is something that I really like. And then my number one came from just a very overwhelming experience that I just that's a no brainer. And so maybe a couple of surprises here. Again, no Mononoke for me. So if you're looking for validation on that one, you will have to talk to Donovan, who should be here as always instead of me.
Yeah, but
But
here's the thing. Well, you say that, and I was talking with him on the phone? Question mark? I don't know. It might have been FaceTime. I don't know why, but it happened recently. And I said, "Oh, is Mononoke your favorite?" And he embarrassingly laughed and he said it's my favorite because it's the only one he's seen. So I guess technically, yes, that would be your favorite. But if you saw like Grave of the Fireflies, would you be like, that's my least favorite I've ever seen?
Mhm.
Technically, it's the only one. So, yeah, I would say well, here's my question, because mine is also about love and enjoyment level and what I get out of it. But I feel like it might not match what my idea of a successful story is or the art. Would you agree with that? Like, if you were to choose which you think is the best Ghibli Ghibli, for whatever reason, just everything together, you feel like this is the best one art-wise. Would that align with your sensibilities and your love and enjoyment?
I suppose not.
Okay.
Certainly, technology-wise, these movies get more beautiful every year as we just introduce better computer-assisted art. I think in my case, the number one is um, something that everybody might agree on, but there's a lot of things like I think that Castle in the Sky is a pretty quintessential Ghibli movie, just as much as something like When Marnie Was There or something, and again Howl's Moving Castle. But there's I don't know, it's weird, and so I think in the case of my top five, also I'm satisfied with it because there's a good representation of their different genres and sensibility or preoccupations. There's slice of life, there's more fantasy, and there's when those two things come together, and that's kind of like I don't know the three Ghibli genres, which are sort of similar and diffuse with one another. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's some movies, especially. I mean, I think Isao Takahata is going to be kind of absent for both of us because we watched a lot of his. Well, we watched all of his movies, of course, and surprisingly, really didn't have much of a response to them. I mean, you might surprise me with a dark horse Yamadas or something, but there's the Tale of Princess Kaguya,
Yeah.
which is considered a masterpiece, and you look at that, the critical response to that movie, and it's amazing. You'd think it was one of the best movies ever. And I think our when we watched it, it was kind of just like, okay, it was honestly kind of boring up until like the very end, which the ending is really great and really like almost overwhelming, but
Yeah.
um again, so that's not going to be there. But I think if you were to ask people like what is the best Ghibli movie, that would be in a top five, and it's just not for us.
Yeah. We've also seen, just to say to others, we've seen some really bizarre films. If
Yeah.
you've not seen the whole catalog, just prepare yourself for Pompoko
No.
and my neighbor the Yamadas. My neighbors? The
Yes,
Yamadas. That was pretty crazy.
that was crazy, but
And
good. That was a really good one.
yeah, it's gotten to the point where now Harry and I share raccoon reels from time to
Although
time.
technically, they're tanuki, which I guess is some sort of Japanese
Yeah,
variant. But
yeah,
raccoons are very charming, very
yeah.
personable, and
Mm.
just weird. They're weird guys.
Oh boy. Okay, so before we even get look, I keep delaying the list, but I did allow Harry and myself 2 honorable mentions. Now these will not
Yes.
have sound clips, but would you like to say what your 2 honorable mentions are?
Can I make it three? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my god. You already got me when you said 2, and I said, "I think I said 1," and then I had to scroll up at the beginning of the conversation. I was like, "Okay, I did say 1 to 2." So
Yes.
you're fine.
I was just gonna roll with it. I was like, yeah, okay, that's okay. Because I mean, I think for me it's kind of a strange situation because my two honorable mentions are Grave of the Fireflies and Ocean Waves. But I only really wanted to talk about Ocean Waves just because Grave of the Fireflies would have been on my top five in a cheating way, tied for number four. But I haven't seen it in a long time. That was another one that I watched early on, just as part of general film appreciation, because that is an essential film. But it's been so long, and I couldn't bring myself to rewatch it like Stella. It's also I don't think it's on HBO Max. But that's a really really good one. I think everybody should see it. Guaranteed to make you cry. Basically, I mean, it's just one of those movies that will make you cry no matter what. But Ocean Way is interesting. I think that it is kind of the definition of an honorable mention. It's not a great movie, but it was one that I really enjoyed for some reason. It was very unusual, and this one comes from famously the younger staff at Ghibli. They were kind of hoping maybe to see the next generation of artists come in and do this thing for a small budget, and it was broadcast on television, so it wasn't even theatrical. It wasn't a theatrical production, and it went like over budget and over time and everything. And it is yet another, as we'll sort of maybe get into, another sort of Ghibli slice of life, kids at school, bopping around the city kind of a movie, but it's got this weird cynicism to it that I think kind of surprised us both. It's a bit sharper. The characters are kind of at each other's throats and mysterious, but I think it is still wholesome and when it gets to those sort of dramatic moments of catharsis, I think maybe all the more rewarding for it because these characters just seem, if not more real, then just a bit different. And it's nice to kind of have, I don't know, more complicated, morally characters in rendered in such a Ghibli way.
That do you hear something? How appropriate. How appropriate. Do I even explain or just let the audience wonder what's happening?
Well, I didn't want to say this because it's so embarrassing, but I live with my parents now, and
I don't think
this is
that's
not my
embarrassing. You're
house,
transitioning to the next stage of your life.
right? Well, I think everybody lives with their parents these days. Everybody in
Yeah.
our age range,
Why
just
pay thousands of dollars in rent when you can be rent free?
right, exactly. But anyway, they go to the bathroom sometimes, and that's what you just heard was the toilet
Sometimes,
flush.
and not the bathroom, but yeah, the toilet flushing. And it would get to the point where I can hear it through the
Mhm.
microphone. And so as we were watching the films, it would go, I'm like, oh, there it is. There. So anyway, I didn't even think about that happening tonight. So that's somewhat of a happy accident. Thank
Yes.
you, Mama and Papa Shoot. So ocean waves. Here's an exception to what I said about strong, well developed, and respectful female characters. And to a certain extent, I guess you could still say that because she has a mind of her own. She's just a flawed female character. And I mean, she behaves as a teenage girl potentially could behave, but I just found her to be really awful. And that's why I'm just turned off by that film because she's just bad and the slapping that happens and the oh man, she is so flighty. I just can't believe she's like suddenly going to Tokyo. She's lied to her friend about it to just to go see her father. And then she brings that one guy to have dinner or whatever with the ex-boyfriend, all these ridiculous things. But I did enjoy those videos or the article and then the video, which I know you don't like that there's some accidental queer undertones between the two guys there. I'm like, well, maybe I can get behind that reading as long, yeah, so they're thinking to be together. But it doesn't work out with the ending. But the one video I watched, I think he said if you put the ending at the beginning, then it works out better because he sees her and then he leaves, but he's with his best friend. But yeah, so that was not on my honorable mentions, I'm afraid.
No, that's too bad. I think it came in at an interesting moment too because I'd been kind of I think Marnie was kind of the one that broke me. I was like, oh god,
Mm,
it's the same characters. Eventually, I kind of get into that rut with Ghibli movies where because they are so similar in a lot of ways thematically and in terms of subject matter and setting that if you are binging them, yeah, you can kind of lose specific details like Whisper of the Heart and Only Yesterday. And so Ocean Wave when it comes up, it's like oh, like here's something like very specific. Like this girl is like really terrible, and I just found that so funny, and honestly entertaining. That yeah, I strangely find that movie endearing.
and mentioning Marnie, like there are some, I feel like there are some queer undertones in that film, and it's clearly unintentional because you find out, of course, that it's her grandmother.
Yeah.
But it's just like, what's going on here? I'm not really sure. And so I hesitated to ask Harry when we were watching, like, okay, I've got a question. It's kind of controversial, but I'll ask you at the end. And then I laid it out. But it's just, yeah, you have kind of a feeling about it. That is interesting about what you say. I wonder if, if someone just prattled off a title, would I be able to tell you what the plot is? And I feel like, yes, because I think they're distinct enough, or at least if you show me maybe a picture of like the main characters, I could potentially do it. But
Yeah.
I do see how, and this is something I think we're going to get into more on your show, where we talk about themes and maybe the universe and some repeat things that happen, like dangerous bicycle riding. But
Yes.
but yeah, and potentially I don't know if I wouldn't ever say it's a lack of creativity that we're seeing similarities, but I think it speaks to things that the creator is really passionate about, like again, anti-war messages and the environment and things like that. But just how do you do that? And make it creative or do something new with it. Do you feel like that is a negative thing that we are seeing some repeats
I
in
mean,
themes?
I think it depends. I really I do like that idea of an artist kind of revisiting certain things and just redoing them. I think for both of us, it was in much sharper relief this time that Princess Mononoke really feels like a redo of Nausicaa. Which I mean, obviously that's not a unique interpretation, but I think that the themes because we just I think we'd watched them like back to back,
Yeah.
and I think that that's interesting. Where I think it gets troublesome is when you start a new Ghibli movie and it starts in a train station or on the road and it's somebody moving from the city to the country and you're like, okay, this like oh god. I mean, it usually ends up being good, but it's like,
Yeah,
oh man, like oh,
we're doing
I've
it
been here
again.
before. Yeah,
Yeah, yep. Well,
and somebody's
my
sick,
what'd you say?
and somebody's sick in the hospital, of course.
Yes, yeah, so there are some themes, and maybe a chubby cat walking around the
Hopefully.
street for sure, yeah. Well, my 2, I only chose 2, and that'd be ridiculous if I chose 3
I would
when
never
I told you
forgive
you
you.
couldn't do it. My 2 honorable mentions are Whisper of the Heart, which I won't talk about because for some reason. But another one is, and which I would say that this is the biggest surprise because I think if I had created my list going into tonight without having rewatched those films, this wouldn't have been even close to, I think, the top 5. But Arrietty,
Oh,
Arrietty is, I think, a big surprise for me as how much I actually really enjoyed it. I thought
hmm,
that the story, even though not much, if you think about it, not much
right.
actually happens because it's just the daily life um of the little borrowers,
Yes.
Ariadne and her family and how they survive. And of course, this sickly boy, and he befriends her, but you're not supposed to know about them. And then in the end, the family ends up leaving with other borrowers that they have found. But I really enjoyed it. I loved again the fancifulness and seeing how inventive the borrowers were using some of these large pieces of humanity but smaller for them. Like how would they get a piece of um sugar, for example? Like they don't need the whole cube. What do they actually do with that? How do they actually go out in the world and do that sort of thing? So I enjoyed that a great deal. I thought it was cute. And then um I think it was heartfelt too. I mean, the discussions that she has with the little boy post that scene, because that was just so ridiculous. It was just, I mean, it was clearly because he was dying. So he's like trying to potentially get into that mindset of what is it like to be the last of your kind? I'm like, this is an inappropriate conversation. But then in the end, they have some really good conversations.
Yeah.
I really liked that. And of course, it's stayed with me because now, for whatever reason, the subtitles on the both audio as the English and Japanese track, whenever it was a human being, which is what the borrowers refer to as like the large people, it said human BEAN. And yeah, we laughed about that the entire night. And now whenever I say it, I say that repeatedly. I just say human being. And no one even thinks twice. They think I'm saying being, but I'm saying bean. So
Hmm.
that has stuck with me. But I enjoyed that film.
Yeah, I was surprised. I also enjoyed that movie. It's beautiful and it's there's a live action American version of The Borrowers, I think with John Goodman, and I think I looked at a few images of it and it seemed like one of those mid '90s kind of like The Mask or Matilda, kind of like
Mm,
slightly grotesque, maybe comedic. But this one, to just cast aspersions on a movie I haven't seen, this one really did feel completely earnest. And yeah, the inventiveness I think was kind of the thing for me. The classic Ghibli world building, but set on this basically, seeing the world from a different perspective,
yeah.
and very literal this time, where you have giant, tiny creatures and insects, and the way they navigate literally the world or the kitchen. That was really cool. And so it's just yeah, it's just an easy and very creative, interesting movie.
Yeah, it's similar to A Bug's Life, which is one of my top 5 probably Pixar films, in that you
Oh,
never really got a sense of, oh well, actually rain can be really dangerous when you're at,
right.
at this size and stuff. So it does, yeah, it really changes your perspective on things. Okay. So now we're gonna get into our top 5, and what's gonna happen with the video is we'll take a break after our thirds, right? Is that what you said? Okay, so we'll have two ones, the ones. Okay, so I found a way I was able to get all the images. She'll share screen. So Harry's going first.
Okay.
Can you see it?
There it is.
Okay.
Aw. So, how do you want to structure this? Is it like, should I say the plot or
Yeah.
render on?
So what I have is, well, basically I ripped just the quick background of what the film is, like who the
Okay,
creators are, and then I do the plot and then why I like it. So
okay, I'll try to follow that model as best I can.
you can do whatever you would like. Just don't go too crazy.
Okay. My number five, because I am a commercial movie loving heathen, I picked Ponyo. And this is surprising because I have very sophisticated taste otherwise, but this is a very popular movie late in the catalog, generally from 2009, and directed by Hayao Miyazaki. I think it's an original story, but it does recall, of course, The Little Mermaid. From my anime list, the plot summary is as follows: a goldfish sneaks away from home and floats off on the back of a jellyfish. Uh, I mean, I guess that's true, but well, the goldfish, she's like a person, so it's it's a magical world where it's very frank. Let's see. The list
Typical.
continues after getting stuck in a glass jar. She drifts to the shore where she is freed by Susuke. I'm guessing that's how that's pronounced. A 5-year-old boy who lives with his mother, Lisa, in a house by the sea, while his father, Koichi, works on a fishing boat. After healing a cut on Susuke's finger by licking it, the goldfish is named Ponyo by her new friend. Unknown to Susuke, Ponyo already has a name and a family. Her father, Fujimoto, a sorcerer who forsook who wrote this?
Did you get this from my anime list watch
Yeah,
list?
yes. That's
For Swook. Uh, way to pre-read what
that's
you're reading out loud.
I know I copied and pasted it into a Word document because you know how it is with online internet talking.
You're
You don't want anything that's slow anything down, but I still have the Google windows open anyway. Um, so anyway, so he forsook his humanity to live underwater, searches frantically for his daughter Brunhilde. When found and captured, Ponyo rejects her birth name and declares that she wants to become a human. Using the power received from Susuke's blood, she grows arms and legs and escapes to the surface once more, but the magic released into the ocean causes an imbalance in nature, causing the moon to start falling out of orbit and the tides to grow dangerously stronger. Reunited with the Ponyo, Susuke must pass an ancient test to restore order in the world and let his companion live as a human. I'm sorry, reading that out, it sounds like the most ridiculous movie ever made.
I forgot her name was Brunhilde in real life.
Yeah, my
Her
gosh.
pre-blood life.
Yeah, and then it's like with the power of your blood, and then the moon starts falling. That's it's weird because when you watch the movie, which is very much a kids movie, very very bright primary colors. The storytelling is pretty simple. I don't know. These things are introduced obviously at a much more natural pace, and so it just feels like, oh, okay, this is what's happening next. And even you might feel the appropriate emotions, but when I'm just sort of spouting it out, yeah, wow, it sounds terrible. So don't take this recommendation based on the plot summary. But that is, I suppose, the best possible picture that I can provide now. Speaking about it contemporaneously, and for me, I don't know. I really I when we watched this, I fired off an angry tweet as one does, and I just said that one of the reasons why Ponyo is so great is because it takes place in the ocean primarily, where Miyazaki usually is preoccupied by the sky, and there's just a lot more stuff in the ocean. And in this ocean, there are coelacanths and little enemites or whatever those fossils are called that sometimes inspire LGBTQ plus films.
I don't recommend
So
that
it's a
film.
very You'll have to give that plot summary too. Um, and so it's just a very full frame that I really appreciate about movies in general, especially genre movies. One of my big disappointments with the Star Wars sequel trilogy, for example, is that it lacked the depth of frame that came with the those awful, awful prequel movies that where just they just looked so amazing, despite the horrid CGI that ages like a fine. It looks terrible now. But anyway, so in Ponyo, you look at that ocean, and there's just all sorts of interesting things bobbing around. In fact, too much detail, as I had to out myself as being a trypophobe, I believe is what it's called, to
Yeah.
Stella as we were
I was
watching
about
it.
to mention that. I'm glad you did.
Yes, because at some point when these goldfish, when they coalesce, which they often do on the frame, it just creates a pattern that interfaces with my brain in such a way that I get like goosebumps, and it's like, oh no, it's I think trypophobia literally is like a fear of holes, but it's a fear of like a specific pattern. And when I say fear, I don't mean I was running screaming. It was just it makes me physically uncomfortable. There's some sort of psychosomatic effect that I'm sure is indicative of a completely stable frame or mind frame. Regardless, Ponyo is it's just a really nice adventure about these two very young kids. I mean, these are probably the youngest protagonists that we have in Ghibli movies, other than Totoro, where you don't even have like the older sibling. It's just like he's a 5-year-old boy, and Ponyo is essentially like a baby or an infant, and I don't know if they fall in love, but they're just like really good friends, and their relationship has all this cataclysmic effect on their little town, which is a nice cliffside or sorry seaside community, and there's not even really like a conflict in this one. Speaking to motivations, it's kind of difficult. I think we were trying to piece together what the villain, quote unquote, wanted, before he's sort of just revealed as like another guy or maybe misguided. And so there's never really a great sense of stakes or threat or menace. It's just a nice movie with a lot of really beautiful visuals and a great sense of movement. So it's just it's just a simple, nice movie that I think makes sense for my number five.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, it's not on my number 5, my top 5 list rather. But it's yeah, I go back and forth whether like what this love is because they clearly do love each other. That the test that is supposed to save, I guess, the world is a love test, is that true love? But I feel like at this moment, it's probably just like a sibling love, and then perhaps it would develop into something farther. So there's nothing I think erotic about this love, but it is
Ooh.
really you don't like that word, but it is really precious, I think, how quickly Ponyo attaches herself to Sasuke, and
Absolutely.
that one moment where they finally stop. I think they were the mother and her crazy driving, I just remembered that. But they finally stop at the house, and then the little girl, is there, and the mother's, like, leaning down to maybe hug her, but she runs right past her and into Sasuke's arms, which I think is a testament there. And then just, some of these films that we've watched, there are interesting relationships between parents and children
Yeah.
and what that is like, and is the child actually acting as the parent. But here Sasuke is in grade school, and he clearly has maturity beyond his years, and at one point he goes to rescue his mom because of everything that's going on. He's worried about her. So you have a mature young boy, and to a certain extent, I guess, trying to, even though he doesn't know that he and Ponyo have caused this, like, he's trying to fix what has happened
Yeah.
by going to save his mom. But, yeah, there are some really beautiful images or imagery, I guess I should say. I think one of my favorite parts is when Ponyo's mother, Brunhilde's mother, comes floating, voiced by Kate Blanchett, if you're watching the English,
Mhm.
but just, like, the beauty of all of that. I think that's when all the ships are, like, stopped and they can see everything. But, yeah, I would say really visually a treat, but just not my favorite. And I think you asked me at one point, didn't you, whether these kids annoyed me? Or was that another
Oh
film?
yes.
Because we'll talk
Well, I
about
only
some kids that annoyed
right.
me, but this one did not annoy me as much. There
Mm.
wasn't as much screaming. So,
No.
yeah.
Though Ponyo is quite hyperactive. I don't know if I could have that kid in my house, but although not my house. Um, I
Uh,
think that the another nice thing that I when you were talking about the relationship between the mother and the child, like, well, first of all, the giant woman voiced by Kate Blanchett is another nice detail. I just like that in general. Whenever there's like a normal sized guy and a giant woman, that's a good ship.
yes.
Um, pun intended. But also, I think that Ponyo is a really good. It has a nice sense of a community, which actually surprisingly doesn't really exist. I wouldn't say in a lot of these movies, which tend to feature people who are pretty closed off or just part of a school, which I suppose is a community of a different sort. But in this case, like kind of like in My Neighbor Totoro, which this movie is very much similar to in a lot of ways, that one kind of opens up at the very end, and you see, oh, all these people are sort of involved in the search for the missing girl. In this case, it's sort of established throughout that this is a town. And so when things start to go bad, you see how people pull together, sometimes literally, and that was just a really nice detail that I enjoyed. You had the wise grandmas in the retirement
Yep.
home, um, who sort of like share this common language with the tiny kids, who like they can sort of speak to each other naturally in the language of like magic or whatever that adults just don't understand. So that's a nice piece.
Yep. And I will say, in contrast to The Little Mermaid, I wouldn't necessarily
Mm,
say that Ponyo is a feminist film. I don't know if I would necessarily
mm,
say that, but the positive thing about this is that Ponyo isn't giving up anything in order to be with the man.
right. Yeah.
And again, I think there's more of a friendship or platonic or agape love going on between the two of them. So, whereas, of course, Ariel had to like give it all up and, Eric and his superficiality, but it seems like Sasuke really loves her for just being the weird little fishy thing that she is.
Which is very that is kid logic, but it is properly communicated, and I think that is probably where the movie falls down for people, if you could even say that about a movie like Ponyo. There's not the same dramatic heft that you might be expecting. I think this movie still managed to spark a twinkle in my eye, even still, but granted, there isn't anything where you're like, oh my god, my heart. Which will happen a lot with Ghibli. So this one is it's light, you know. And I think that it's probably one of those movies that people will talk about and say, well, it's not one of Ghibli's or Miyazaki's masterpieces, blah, blah, blah. It is really good because that comes up a lot because he's just one of those filmmakers who really established himself with a lot of classics very early on in his career and throughout. And so this is definitely a later era Miyazaki movie, even though at this point it's more than 10 years old. But I mean, it feels not of the moment, but contemporary. You could throw this at a child today, and they would not um, be like, "Oh, I don't want to watch this old thing." Although it is not a TikTok video
Oh
as the
gosh.
kids are into these days,
Yeah.
which
To their detriment and ours. I will say there are some environmental messages, but they're not as heavy-handed, which is potentially
right.
because Miyazaki knows what his audience or the intended audience is. But I mean, as we
Mm,
were going through, I think it was one of the initial scenes of seeing like the underwater as well as the above water and seeing all the garbage. And I
yeah.
think Ponyo, I guess Brunhilde at the time, doesn't she get captured in a trawler and it's got all this garbage with there? And I think her father
Yeah.
even mentions how dirty the human beings are. So there are messages there, I think, but not as heavy, with some of the other ones that we've watched.
Right. I don't know that it's necessarily. Well, it might be. I think there may have been an attempt to weave that into the narrative because it is about like Ponyo, you can't be in the human world because they're dirty. But I don't think that. Again, speaking to the villain's motivations, like he was so kind of unclear in what his whole thing was about that it's difficult to come up with a coherent message at the end, and so it was just sort of there, not in the background, but just in the way that the human world was literally rendered. That the industry produces waste, and that waste filters down into the ocean, and that's clearly not a good thing. But it's not like a war between these two worlds as it is in Princess Mononoke.
Would you consider her father a villain? You keep using that word. I would consider him an antagonist.
Oh, sure, antagonist. Yeah, I guess I use those interchangeably, though I
Oh, okay.
shouldn't.
Yeah, I was gonna say I just see it differently, as like the villain in or the guy in Laputa, I would consider that a villain, but
Ooh,
maybe
yes.
like the Armless Legless Wonder in Nausicaa, I would consider him an antagonist. So
Yes,
I think it, but
absolutely.
we could chat about that. But I just felt like he's not evil, but he's certainly doing some shady things
Yeah,
based
I
on what
think
he
I
laid
think he's
out for me here.
both misunderstood and misguided, I suppose. There's that interesting scene where he is spraying water. When he first comes ashore,
Oh
he's got this
yeah.
strange contraption.
Yes. I forgot how ridiculous that is. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very good stuff.
And
That's,
the
I mean,
mother's
that's
like,
definitely one
watch
thing that
out
you
for
get.
people like that.
Yes, you can't just be because she thinks it's like weed killer or something. Um,
Yes. Oh man. Stranger danger. Anything else on
yes.
your number five?
I don't know. There's really not much to say about Ponyo. I think it may have been nominated for Best Animated Feature because there's approximately 5 animated features released every year, so they all tend to be nominated for that
Yeah.
award. But I don't think it won. It must have been a big year for Pixar. But yeah, it's just a really nice movie and one of the few that really feels like a children's movie with like no strings attached. Like there's no really greater message as an adult. You're not gonna come away with your mind totally blown. It's just like it is just it's kind of borderline color and light, but it is obviously not offensive in its content like a lot of DreamWorks movies or Illumination pictures or anything like that. It's nice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my number five, you have no idea,
No.
is
Oh.
Porco Rosso. I actually had trouble with my five and four. I literally ordered this stuff while I was watching Castle Cagliostro. So I
Wow.
finally came down to it. So Porco Rosso in the Japanese is Kurenai no Mbuta, literally crimson pig. It's can also be red pig in Italian or red pork. And in a broader
Ooh.
definition, it can mean red swine or red ham. So just be aware of that. But it is a 1992 adventure comedy film written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki. And it is based
Yes.
on the Hikote Jidai, the Age of the Flying Boat, which is a three-part 1989 watercolor manga by Miyazaki. Okay, so here's the plot. After again from my anime watch list, let's see if this one's as good as yours. After a curse turned him into a pig, World War One ace Marco Pajot becomes Porco Rosso, a mysterious bounty hunter who takes down sky pirates in the Adriatic Sea. He whiles away his days on a secluded island, rarely leaving other than to collect bounties or to visit the beautiful Gina, a songstress and owner of the Hotel Adriano. One day, while traveling to fix his faulty engine, Porco Rosso is gunned down by a young American hotshot named Donald Curtis. Thrilled at the possibility of fame, Donald boldly declares that the flying pig is dead. Not wanting to disappoint Gina, Porco Rosso flees to the famous Piccolo SPA airplane company and takes out a massive loan in order to repair and improve his fighter plane. There, he is surprised to find that the chief engineer of Piccolo SPA is a 17-year-old Fio Piccolo, who hungers for a chance to prove herself. With Fio's improvements, Porco Rosso prepares to challenge Donald officially and regain his honor. And it doesn't end in a dogfight, but do you remember how they're fighting on the beach and they're like so tired and so beat up? This is one of those films that I could probably repeatedly watch just because it brings me joy. You don't ever find out how he got this curse. And in the end, I don't think it even matters. Just know that he has it and see the people that he interacts with and how they either don't like him or they admire him or they love him in the case of Gina. There's certainly shipping. She always waits for him in the garden, and at one point, I think he might show up and maybe the curse vanishes. But he is he seems like a nice guy, but he also says very piggish things, in how he deals with women sometimes, or with Theo being around, the grandfather's like, "You need to, keep your hands to yourself," sort of situation. But I think you can see his heart not only in how he relates to Gina, but with Theo and how much he cares for her, and she's 17 years old, so of course, at the beginning, you'd underestimate her, but to your detriment. And then just their relationship, and she ends up leaving with him and helping him out, and then she gets notoriety by these sea pirates, and they love her so much. But it's just, I think it's a really fun film, and I don't know if, I guess we could say that it's anti-war potentially, or at least we see what the results are of war and wartime. And then, oh, I don't know. There are just so many wacky things that happen that I almost don't take it as seriously as like a war film, compared to like the Wind Rises or something like that. But Porco Rosso, I just find him a really intriguing and funny guy. And even though he does say piggish things, he has a heart of gold, and he really fights for what matters, and he has good friendships, and he is a loyal pig to other people. So I really recommend Porco Rosso. I mean, it's bizarre, like he's a pig, but I just like totally buy in right at the beginning. And if you're watching the English, it's Michael Keaton as Porco Rosso, which is a lot of fun.
Oh.
But yeah, so what did you think when you were watching the big PR?
Well, I had known of Porco Rosso. I mean, I just knew about it generally, but there was that image that went viral, which was his quote in the movie theater, I think, where he says, "I'd rather live as a pig than a fascist or a capitalist or something like that." And he is a very interesting character in that way. This is more of a comedy than I was expecting, but I mean, obviously, when you have this central image of a pig man in a plane, like there's only so much. I mean, you got to sort of be true to that.
Yeah.
And I think that the movie is, to its credit. And so, yeah, it just sort of understands that there is something very compelling about that central image. And the resulting character from that situation is really, it is interesting, or he is interesting. I think Michael Keaton is a very good indication. That's a good casting pick right there. Um, and this movie I think is important, generally speaking, in the Miyazaki oeuvre because it not only anticipates his more or his most personal work in The Wind Rises, as you mentioned. You have all of that attention, very very minute attention to mechanical detail. When the anime people talk about mechanical design, they talk about Shinji Aramaki, they talk about the genocide for guy can't Koichi Ohata. They do some amazing stuff, and they did certainly the 1980s. But I think Miyazaki maybe is a bit underrated in this regard because not only is there just so much beautiful, stunning detail on the planes and the vehicles, but the sense of weight and physics that exists in these flying scenes when they're just trying to get the plane started. It's really kind of breathtaking. And I think a movie like this does it maybe it calls into question like, well, why does it even have to be animated? Because the only fantasy element is Porco Rosso himself. But I think that I don't know, maybe it just he finds a way to draw your eye to those details when it's so deliberately rendered and composed. And then by contrast to all that sort of the serious aspect of the movie, I do appreciate that it does end in like a slap fight. That the movie is sort of low stakes despite taking place against the backdrop of a war,
Yeah.
an historical war too. I mean, this is I think like based on real historical events. So it's just a very interesting take, and a very clever, surprising main character who is very much a pigman.
Yeah. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think that he's in trouble by some military officials, like on
Yeah.
both sides, because I think he's left one army and the other one, of course, he's an enemy of.
Hmm.
So clearly he likes his bounty hunting, and doesn't. And I think part of it is because he lost his best friend who happened to be Gina's husband. So you do see the cost of war. So there are some of those, I think, serious elements as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's delightful. Probably the only time I don't sit there wondering, like, how did he get that curse? Because you're not shown and you're not totally just like it is. And you just, and I think that's the power of it for me, anyways, that I completely buy into it and I'm with it. Like, yeah, there's a pig right here. And everyone else, that's the only fantastic element. You're right. But I buy into it and just like, this is the real world. He just happens to be a pig man.
Right. Yeah. I think that issue definitely speaks to the way that these movies, the just the inherent storytelling. I don't even think that Nausicaa opens with like a text crawl. Like that's just so seemingly anathema to the philosophy of how these filmmakers approach story, which is um, the exposition is just like I don't know, drip fed to you at like the perfect pace that you are not brought to question these things because you're just involved in the moment. And there are moments where Porco Rosso is very involving emotionally. Again, surprising because it is more of a comedy. And we'll talk about the balance of comedy and drama later. But I think that this one strikes a pretty good one. Yeah, it's just, I mean, this is the movie where a pig flies a plane, so you got to see that anyway.
You
So,
do. Yeah.
it's good.
His curse somewhat resembles Sophie's in that, at unseen times, he does revert back to being a
Oh,
human, but when
right.
someone points attention to it, it immediately goes back to being a pig. Sophie in House
Mhm.
Moving Castle, but yeah.
Very
Okay.
interesting.
On to your number 4.
Moving right along, my number four is
Boop.
well, it's my neighbor Totoro. What can you say? I was surprised, honestly. I didn't think that I would have as significant a reaction to this one. I mean, Totoro is pretty notorious. I think, along with Spirited Away, it's kind of the like iconic Ghibli movie in terms of it literally spawned an icon.
Did.
In this case, Totoro and his little woodland pals, and Spirited Away, No Face. Um, yes, and in fact, as you remind me now, Totoro has become the official Studio Ghibli mascot and helped us synchronize our playthroughs of these movies because sometimes you would be watching it on the DVD and I'd be watching it on HBO Max always, but we could trust that that logo would be there at the
Yes,
beginning.
that did have, yeah, help us.
So he was always a guiding spirit. Let's see, My Neighbor Totoro. The film, which is set in Tokorozawa City, Saitama Prefecture, tells the story of a professor's two young daughters, Satsuki and Mei, and their interactions with friendly wood spirits in post war rural Japan. That's the short version from Ghibli.fandom. My anime list has in 1950s Japan, Tatsuo Kusakabe relocates himself and his two daughters, Satsuki and Mei, to the countryside to be closer to their mother, who is hospitalized due to a long-term illness. As the girls grow acquainted with rural life, Mei encounters a small bunny-like creature in the yard one day. Chasing it into the forest, she finds Totoro, a giant mystical forest spirit whom she soon befriends. Before long, Sasaki too meets Totoro, and the two girls suddenly find their lives filled with magical adventures in nature and fantastical creatures of the woods. Um, so I think for me, My Neighbor Totoro really captures that kind of one of the great things about not only Ghibli movies but also as I have witnessed in the past Pixar movies, where there's always something sort of going on, and it just you just get this sense of creativity in every frame, every corner, which is something that Roger Ebert talked about in his write up on Spirited Away. And in this case, well, in a lot of Ghibli movies, you'll see like little creatures chattering around. Princess Mononoke, there's a lot of scenes where, or there's that one scene in particular where I can't remember who's carrying who, but oh, the main character Ashitaka is carrying wounded soldiers back to the forest, and he meets the chittering woodland spirits, and they're sort of like imitating what he's doing, sort of just playing around, and it's just
Right? Yeah.
this small detail that is drawn attention to, but is it makes the world feel bigger. And My Neighbor Totoro is essentially a movie about that. It is a movie about those kinds of moments blown up to be the whole thing, where you have the key sequence where Mei and Satsuki are waiting in the rain for their father to return home at the bus stop, and Totoro just sort of sidles up next to them, and he's just standing there, being sort of entertained by the rain hitting the umbrella. And that is just what this movie is about. It's about just kind of kooky moments, but not in a way like Pompoko. This one feels a bit more strangely reserved in a sense, especially for a kids movie. Like it's not just bounding with annoying franticism, although there are the two kids who apparently in the English dub are quite insufferable, as Stella might attest to.
I think
For
it's the
me,
Fanning, the Fanning. It's Dakota and Elle Fanning, which
oh,
I
that's
find
interesting.
amusing. Yeah. But
Yeah,
anyways, keep going. Yeah.
they didn't bother me so much, and I wonder if it was just a difference in the audio track. But I found them quite endearing as they were sort of just running around this new house that they're moving into and discovering living soot, which is something that will come up later. Um, and it's just kind of like a weird, fun movie about this cute aspect of the woods, and it fills you with wonder. And there's this great scene where they're trying to summon a great tree out of the ground, and so they're doing this kind of dance, ritualistic dance in the garden. It's very cute, and then in the end, um, it surprisingly becomes dramatic all of a sudden, and it feels natural and earned, and it kind of takes you by surprise because there is this underlying sadness, I guess, in the movie that there is this mother in the hospital. So you might be able to make some sort of like Pan's Labyrinth, Heavenly Creatures argument that maybe this is just the imaginative throes of grief, but I don't think that that's really an interesting look at this particular movie. And regardless, it just makes for some interesting, honestly, drama. The clip that I provided, Stella, um, is a an argument that just comes about naturally between two siblings, and I think part of what's interesting about this movie and maybe Ghibli movies in total is that their child characters really feel like children. The way that they are sort of governed by pettiness, or they just have this outburst of emotion that they can't control. They're not constantly like making pop culture references. They feel like kids, and sometimes that is annoying, but sometimes it is also endearing. And in this case, it bends toward that endearing, end of the spectrum in a way that is, almost alarming, and becomes sort of rewarding. I think, yeah, at the very end. So yeah, surprising movie that I just really enjoyed.
And there's a cat bus.
Oh my god, I went the whole thing without mentioning the cat bus.
How dare you? Yeah, this is not on my top 5. I know that people love it. I know that it's probably on the top 5 of all of these films for many lists, and each time I watch it, I just can't get into it for whatever reason. I don't know, am I bored? The kids do annoy me with their, like, screeching, just it seems like it's too much. So maybe I should attempt to watch the Japanese version of it rather than the English and see if that changes. But, I don't know. It just seems like, and this is hypocritical, but it seems like nothing happens, and I'm just following these people. Now I do enjoy the creatures, which I think is a lot of fun, and I think I did read an article about sort of the death, or the kind of the aura of death is or the threat of it is all around this film, and I thought, oh, that's an interesting take. But you mentioned Pan's Labyrinth, and as you were speaking, I was actually thinking about that, because there are many times where it's called into question whether this is just the daughters seeing this, because do the parents see this at all? The adults,
Right, I
things
don't
kind
think
of
so.
are explained of what's actually happening afterwards, like, the one was it May gets trapped in, like, a little thing, and, like, kind of in a burrow of some sort, and then later
Yeah.
on, it's just like she's just pulled out of it. But at the very end, similar to Pan's Labyrinth, which I like that film, I know Harry doesn't care for that film as much, um, it's called into question of, oh, actually, these things might be there, because at the hospital, the mother actually says, I swear I saw, the daughters with like something in the tree. So I do like that aspect of it. But yeah, it's not my favorite. I don't know, maybe it is too childlike, which is sad. Like, I don't want to be past the point where I can't enjoy the childlike ones. But besides the creatures, yeah, I think it's just those two girls. I don't know. I don't know. So I guess I should try one more time and try the Japanese and see if maybe I can get past it.
Well, is this movie that you would like recommend to people? Because it is so popular that maybe it would just sort of have a higher success rate than some others.
Yeah, I so the Sawyers are kind of the people that I would bring over these films, and unfortunately, not all of them are on board with the anime, so they make fun of it. So we have watched Kiki and Porco. I don't know if we've done Howl, but Spirited Away happens to be the youngest daughter's favorite, so that was a success, and she owns it
Hmm.
now. So that's like their one anime film that they have on their shelf. And
Wow.
at one point, I was over and someone made a request of watching Totoro because he had heard it was Jacob. He had heard that it was well regarded, and so I was like, okay, well, we'll put on the Totoro. So I don't know that I would. Well, I guess if it's something to like ease somebody in, because Akira certainly would not be how I would ease somebody
No.
in. And that's coming from someone who's seen that film. But it might be an easier one to say like, hey, people regard this highly without me coloring it. Like I wouldn't say, hey, this is great, but I don't really care for it. I would never do that.
Right.
So I would potentially, yes, I would recommend it.
And then you'd have to sit through it again. Ugh.
I would, yes. So I had to do it. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say no to them. I was like, okay. And then I was like, well, I'm in for it now. So
And then you watched it again with another child, in this case, me.
I know. And you enjoyed it and you like really loved that scene of the argument and everything. Yeah, that one, that was pretty crazy. Because she tells her to
Yeah.
stay. She's like, I gotta go run and tell father, wasn't it, or whatever. She's like, stay
Hmm.
here. And then she doesn't, she gets lost, and it's a whole thing. But yeah.
Yeah. And
I
that's
guess
just,
they're
I mean,
acting their
it's
ages, so
right, which I was just kind of really surprised by. I mean, in that scene, it's almost comedic the way it's timed because they have this argument, which just again feels very real, and then the older daughter runs off, and the younger daughter is with this kid, this boy who's been sort of following them around, and he's like, "Okay, May, like let's get out of here," and she just bursts out into tears, and it's like it's just so sudden, and kind of funny, but then it's like I don't know, it just for whatever reason, like this sort of very, very light, very fantastical movie is undercut with a very genuine humanity that kind of manifests in surprising ways. But it's always, I just really appreciate that specific juxtaposition, which I think is kind of, um, it's difficult to pull off. And it's just so interesting that this, I don't know, it's just a weird movie, I think, because if you're going to commit yourself as a filmmaker to a fantasy movie, you would think that you would sort of try to make Princess Mononoke every time. Obviously, that's a lot harder, but like to spend 2 3 years in painstaking production on something that does feel like in a way kind of like a casual experience, but that does have these sort of surprising moments of drama. Like I don't know, it's just there's just I guess there's just something about the sort of laid back nature, the relaxing vibes of Totoro in a lot of these movies that I do appreciate. That will only continue into my number three, as we will talk about at some point. But yeah, I don't know. That's it's a difficult point for me to articulate, but hopefully I got maybe the gist of it out.
yeah, no, I think you did. Anything
Thanks.
else on Totoro?
I don't know what those little guys are, like the little things that sit on his head, but I think I like those even better than Totoro. I
The
just think those
little,
guys are really cute.
yeah, the little guys.
Yes.
The little,
He
yeah.
looks like there was that weird Pikachu thing that went around where he was like wearing a Pikachu costume, but it was like something else. Like he looks kind of like
Oh,
that. I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know
Yeah,
what
it's
that
all
is
about the
about.
creatures. The creatures in the Ghibli are certainly something that warms my heart. And if I can become attached to them, which often I am, then I think that's the way to my heart. So the relationships and then the creatures that are around and kind of the familiars, as I think I would style them with some of the characters that just have these animals that are with them that are not mere animals, they're not pack animals, they're not just they like act as something more to them.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, my number 4, this supplanted Whisper of the Heart, because I think maybe originally Whisper of the Heart would have been on my top 5 list had you asked me a couple years ago. But honestly, It's gotta be. Oh, look at that. That's awkward how it's got that watermark on it.
No.
Oh, well. But it is from Up on Poppy Hill.
Mhm.
In Japanese, it is Kokoriko Zaka Kara, and it is 2011, a drama, as they say, directed by Goro Miyazaki and scripted by Hayao Miyazaki and Keiko Niwa. And here we go. It is set in 1963. Atop a hill overlooking a seaside port sits a boarding house named Kokwakot Manor. Since the building is run by her family, Umi Matsuzaki carries out many of the duties involved in managing the small establishment, such as preparing meals for her fellow boarders. When she isn't at home, she's a student at the local high school, one that is currently dealing with a small crisis. In anticipation of the upcoming Olympic Games, a beloved old clubhouse is set to be demolished to make way for a modern building. As a result, a large part of the student body has banded together, working tirelessly to prevent this from happening. Umi finds herself helping the newspaper club to spread information about this cause, where she befriends Shun Kazama, whom she gradually begins to fall in love with. And I should say that it is mutual. But Shun is an orphan who doesn't know much about his origins. And when the two begin searching for clues to the boy's past, they discover that they may have a lot more in common than either of them could have thought, i.e., they might be half siblings. Which, yeah, puts a stop to that relationship real quick. Oh, what to say about this? So this was one of the films that I saw. I think I was probably at Target and I saw that it was maybe G Kids or, Ghibli. It was G Kids. And of course Ghibli as well. And I'm like, I'm gonna take a chance on this. And went home and watched it and was just I was just astounded by it. I really love it. I think primarily because of the romanticism. I'm not gonna lie. It's all about that. But the the relationships between fathers and their children, which I think often is neglected. I mean, I say that having just talked about Tortoro, which was certainly mostly, I think, about fathers and daughters. But here, what is that relationship like? What is it like when you don't know who your parent is, when you've lost your parent? So Umi, her father was killed in an accident on sea and or out at sea, and then Shun doesn't know necessarily, who his father is. He's adopted. He doesn't know too much. So that I think that's really interesting. Umi is, I think, more mature than her age asks for, just in how much, because her mother is off doing other things. So she is almost like the head of the household and has so many responsibilities and of course school and everything. And then she becomes similar to Theo in Porco, she becomes this like model female that everyone kind of bows down to over at that house, and just really gets the guys into gear and doesn't take any gruff. Remember that one guy from the philosopher club that's like, come into my hut. So there's some like really wacky things. There's some classic coming of age awkwardness between male and female. And then the moment where Shun discovers that they might be half sibling, like they might share the same father, and seeing the separation between the two, or really how he is putting distance between the two and acting a bit colder. And then they have that frank discussion and everything. And it's just really, I'm so engaged in it that I'm like following along and feeling the feelings that they do, and all of that conflict in there. And then there's that one beautiful moment where they had gone, I don't know if it was Tokyo or not. Oh, to meet with the corporate people behind, basically to try to
Wow.
say, don't destroy our building. And then they had that frank discussion, and then she said, "I love you." And he says that as well, but it's like, but that's the last time that we can say that. And they like hold hands and everything. You're like, wow, this is really heart-wrenching because they're really putting it on the line. You see how much. So it's like a really serious, I mean, it's dramatic. Like, how dramatic is that? You would probably see that on a soap opera or whatever, but I think it's dealt with so deftly. I think that it's both sweet and heartbreaking, and I take it seriously. I don't feel like, "Oh, I'm rolling my eyes at this whole thing." You're like, really I'm really invested in this particular relationship. And, spoilers at the end, everything is sort of cleared up. So I'm hoping that, if there were From Up on Poppy Hill Part 2, which there's not going to be, that they would be together in the future. But I also just really like Umi. So again, it's just another example of a strong and really well written female character. And to a certain extent, I think Miyazaki, well, in this case, it's Goro, has maybe an archetype for some of their female characters because they do take on, I think, more responsibility than is necessary for, she's 16 or 17, and she's basically the leader of this household, and without her, things would really be awry. So you have these really mature women for their age. And I don't think that's anti-feminist at all because the feminist me would be like, why is she in charge of housekeeping? But it's that she's like in charge of a business and she's also the host with all of these guests. So that's like a really big responsibility. So I also just like her as a character. And how they meet is really funny because Shun jumps off of the building. There's like this huge banner of like save this building. And then she rushes over for whatever reason because he's in this pool of water and they like shake hands and we're like, whoa, which is a lot of fun. Just, teenagers do that, if there's any like male female interaction, we're just like, oh, what's happening here? But I think there's a lot going on here. I think primarily I love the romance of it, but I think there's a lot of depth to this film as well. And I enjoyed it.
I thank God that this movie exists because we had previously suffered through Goro's previous two or maybe later efforts, Tales from Earthsea and Earwig and the Witch, and we went deep on Earwig and the Witch because which will not be appearing later. So I suppose we can talk about it briefly now.
Yeah.
Um, Probably the worst Ghibli movie. I think we might even agree on that, surprisingly. But
Yeah.
we ended up reading the book by Diane Wynne Jones, who's also the author of Howl's Moving Castle, and the book is just as bad as the movie. Like it's just a nothing story. So Goro, who has this really kind of complicated reputation as the son of Hayao Miyazaki, who broke out with Tales of Earthsea, which was very bad, and then Earwig and the Witch later, which was very very bad. But it's honestly, I mean, it's a straight adaptation. Like the only thing he added was the weird rock band element, which didn't add or subtract anything. Um,
Yeah.
so you really got to blame the source material. And I think in this case, like being written, co-written by Hayao Miyazaki, like you see that he is a competent director. And I really, really like the way that, as you mentioned, the characters just they feel real in that way that is consistent, I think, with some of the Ghibli movies, like Only Yesterday, Whisper of the Heart, and honestly, Ocean Waves. There's no magic in this one. It is a kind of it's just a romance story, and that's really nice. I think I may have frustrated you maybe the most with this one, although well we'll suss that out because I think for me it only really came together at the very end when it sort of revealed like what this story has been about, which is kind of the previous generation, and so it's like this almost like a mystery box story that is revealed at the very end, and it's very nice. I was really moved by that. Um, but what you describe wasn't really my experience with the movie because I do like that central conflict of two people who cannot be together because they're actually related. Uh-oh. But most of the movie seemed to be taken up by the whole like fraternity club part of this school, which I just found completely uninteresting.
Oh,
Um, I mean, essentially, there's this. I don't know if you've seen Love, Victor, which was the TV spin-off of Love, Simon,
no,
the
I
movie.
haven't.
Um, so it opens, well, it sort of opens anyway. Victor is introduced to the new high school by this like a nerd weird friend who opens the doors to the high school and he like spins around and he's like, welcome to, Creekwood High. And I'm like that is so TV and like so beyond my experience where I was one of these kids who like really couldn't stand school growing up. Like I was just so anti-school. And so like the thing that offended me the most about school tended to be that sort of like aspect of it, like the culture. Like I can't like it is so beyond my comprehension why anybody would like be involved in a club. And so when you sort of um bring that into the fore or whatever, like with a essentially like a frat house where all these guys are doing like awesome things, like having a weird philosophy hut or like doing science experiments or like running a journal. I just thought that was like insufferable. And it's a small part of the narrative, but it takes up I think a lot of screen time. And for me, that was ruinous, honestly.
This is why
I'm
Harry and I
sorry.
can't be true friends because of this. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I enjoyed that part. There's a whole cast of characters. It's just a clubhouse with all the clubs stacked on top of each other.
I just hate guys so much, especially teenage boys, and
See?
like I don't care about their worlds or anything. I
Uh,
mean, I
yeah.
I really like the main character though, the and even the two central leads who do seem wise beyond their years, and the journey that they go on is pretty remarkable. So it is a good movie, and it's a good movie um, in the catalog because it does redeem Goro
Or
Miyazaki, who
yeah.
is kind of the ultimate underdog, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah. I guess, folks, you need to decide which person you support. So,
Yes,
but to
I
see or not to see.
this one, I mean, this one did really well, so I think most people are going to be Team Stella on this one.
I hope so.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Feedback requested. So anything else on From Up on Poppy Hill?
No, I think that's it. I just would gush about it. So
And I don't want to hear it.
I know you don't. That's why I will I'll be
Thank you.
considerate of my
Thank
guest,
you
just
for your
like Umi
discretion.
would.
Exactly.
Yep.
Bearing the weight of the world. Well, it is interesting that this replaces Whisper the Heart because there is some crossover there where
Yeah,
you
it
have
is.
that daughter who definitely has a lot of responsibilities. And then for me, of course, my number three is Whisper the Heart, which was directed by a fella named Yoshifumi Kondo. His only feature film, he had been working as an assistant animator on Ghibli. We discussed this actually on a recent Q&A podcast, or the recent Q&A podcast, where Whisper of the Heart made my top 10 of the things that I saw that
Can
year. It's a
hardly
long
believe
story.
it.
The only Ghibli movie to make it. But it's I was really surprised because this is another one where um, it's yet another story that kind of starts in a high school and it's about these kids or middle school, I think in this case. Um, and there's like a cat involved and music, and it's just like on paper, it really doesn't sound like it would be my cup of tea. Um, and anyway, that paper reads from, again, my anime list, Shizuku Tsukishima. That's got to be one of the harder names we've come across. He's an energetic nope, she's an energetic 14-year-old girl who enjoys reading and writing poetry in her free time. Glancing at the checkout cards of her books one evening, she notices that her library books are frequently checked out by a boy named Seiji Amasawa. Curiosity strikes Shizuku, and she decides to search for the boy who shares her love of literature. Meeting a peculiar cat on the train. I'm sorry. Meeting a peculiar cat on the train, Shizuku follows the animal and is eventually led to a quaint antique shop where she learns about a cat statuette known as the Baron. Taking an interest in the shop, she surprisingly finds Seiji, and the two quickly befriend one another. Shizuku learns while acquainting herself with Seiji that he has a dream that he would like to fulfill, causing her dismay as she remains uncertain of her future and has yet to recognize her talents. However, as her relationship with Seiji grows, Shizuku becomes determined to work toward a goal, guided by the whispers of her heart and inspiration from the Baron. She resolves to carve out her own potential and dreams. Um, plot wise, I don't know why this movie stuck out to me as much as it did. It starts with a very interesting musical motif, which is the American song Country Roads. And I don't know how that plays in the dub, but yeah, it was just I think they might have been doing like Japanese lyrics with the instrumental, so that was just kind of a weird surprise. But there's a lot about this movie that is weird. First of all, you have this element of the Baron, which is one of the few, or not few, but one of the most striking Ghibli motifs because they made a whole spin-off movie that is kind of a sequel called The Cat Returns, which is basically if the Baron, or it's like a story of the Baron as a character, and that is much more of a fantasy film. Um, and plot structure wise, it's just kind of all over the place. It feels like two different movies slapped together. But I think in that structure, there is this kind of central romantic conceit of the world that you know and then the world that is to be discovered that feels apart from the familiar. That this girl really goes on a journey, and discovers this world that is hidden, and that sort of has this central romantic emotional pull. But for me, what I really liked about it was just that love triangle that occupies the first part of the movie that quickly becomes a love, sextahedron. Um, it was just there was just something about the ways that characters kind of almost struggled against each other and struggled against their own feelings, and had to kind of try to express these emotions that they had without disrupting the delicate political balance of middle school. Because again, as you referenced, this is one of those movies where the school children are like, when the boy comes in saying, "Hey, is Shizuku here?" Everybody goes, "Ooh."
Oh,
I think we really enjoyed that part. So yeah, Whisper of the Heart. It's sad to look back on because it is the only film that this guy made before his premature death. I think he must have been 40 or 50. And it's I don't know. It's just really nice. It has a very incisive, almost aching humanity to it. That's just really enjoyable, and it really tugs at your heartstrings.
you have she is potentially an irresponsible person. I remember she doesn't do as well in the chores department or, the responsibilities that her parents give her. But you
Hmm.
start to see her in the course of this film, you see as she grows up, and specifically because she understands, I think, what her passion is and what she wants to be and become, which is a writer. And I think her older sister serves as a nice contrast to her, like, juxtaposition of, what is that like, that adulthood? Because she ends up moving out and goes off and has a profession. So you can kind of see the different phases of everything. And then she bonds with her love interest because they both are passionate about these things. And so, what does it mean to pursue those dreams? And then, how can we be together while also pursuing those dreams? Which I thought was really powerful as well, because he wants to be the best violin crafter as he can be, but he also wants to be with her. And that love confession, I think, is a great confession. And I always love, easy way to my heart, besides the little animals, is the little blushing that anime characters get on their cheeks. I very much enjoy that. But yeah, I enjoyed this film.
Yeah, there's a strange, well, not strange, but it feels very full in a way. Like you get a sense for the world that is not always the case with Ghibli movies, but when it does happen, it's really nice. There's just a real lived-in feeling to the library and to the school, and especially her home life, because yeah, she has this older sister, who is the only responsible person in her family, because her parents are almost bohemian, like they just sort of lay around and talk about her. Very interesting. And this was, as you mentioned at the top, one of your possible honorable mentions. So if you hadn't already discussed it, like why would you what draws you to this movie?
What draws me to it? Probably the shipping and the school setting. I mean, slice of life is my favorite genre in
Mm,
anime when I'm, searching out series to watch. And then I also like the school settings of things. I don't know if that's because of being a teacher, maybe, so I can relate more to it
mm,
because I see these kids all the time. And, yeah, with just the lead characters being in middle school or junior high or high school, I just feel like I really understand, how difficult it is for them because I witnessed it for 10 years and probably will soon again. And just, yeah, the fanciful nature of it, because there are some fantasy elements, but it's still grounded. So the Baron, of course, the cat that she finds, Moon, who has kind of crosses over in other films, we feel like, without
yeah.
really being outwardly stated. But like, does this cat know what's going on? What's happening? And then using the Baron as an inspiration for her story. So Yeah, I enjoy it, and yeah, having awkward love quadrangles or whatever it is a lot of fun. But if that song went on for more than it did, I think I would have gotten annoyed because it is repeatedly used.
Yes.
In the English, they're singing, but it's not the same. I mean, it says country roads, but then they sort of, and Brittany Snow is the lead here,
Oh,
but yeah, they use different lyrics, which is interesting.
I guess they couldn't clear
Oh,
the
do
rights
you
for
hear
that.
that? Folks, that's number 2. But anyways, yes, I would say that's primarily what it is. But in this time that I was watching it with you, I think I started to see more about, having passions and dreams and being on the cusp of adulthood or trying to find what you want to do, which speaks to me as an educator because students now, more or less, I would say, and especially because of parental pressures, are all about success. And what does that look
Hmm.
like? I want to get all A so I can get into a good college, so I can get a good paying job, etc. And there's like a lack of passion there. Like, yes, strive for the best you can be, but should you also be looking for something that you're passionate about, which is something that I'm like really thinking about now because the current job that I'm at, I really do not like. And I just need to endure for, grad school period. But I'm just like, gosh, how could you be? I'm just thinking about other people who are at jobs that they don't like. How do you do that? Because it's just so wearing, mentally and emotionally. And so to really see that, I think in animated form, someone seeking out their passion, whether that's going to give them money or not, at least they're pursuing it, I think was really powerful this time around.
Yeah, I responded to that too, and I think I I am privileged to have parents who are exceptions to that because they are very supportive of my ludicrous dreams, which is perhaps why I end up back here spending all my money on massive manga. So maybe it doesn't always work out, but we'll see. Yeah, so the Whisper of the Heart is just it's a rare entry in the catalog, despite having a lot of thematic crossover with other movies like Only Yesterday, which I thought I was really gonna like, and even The Wind Rises to an extent, just in the ways that I don't know, I can't really back that up, but maybe we'll talk about that at some point. And Whisper of the Heart does also contain a musical sequence that is not Country Roads that is really quite beautiful and I think worth admission just for that one sequence, and you'll know it when it comes. So yeah, just a really nice again sense of humanity to this one, and very passionate characters, which is nice.
Absolutely. Okay. Last one before our break.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm over here. Boop.
Ooh,
My number 3 is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind.
nice.
So this
Uh,
is, yes, we're
well,
good.
since this is also on my list, should we just go into it now?
Or I guess you could not say much.
Okay. Well,
Do you
it's
want to
I
do
mean it's the
that?
one. I mean I'm going to talk about it next anyway, so we might as well just we'll just talk about it.
Okay. So I guess Harry has spoiled that
Sorry.
his number 2, did I do another image? I don't know. Yeah, okay. His number 2 is also Nausicaa. So for once we agree, and but I mean that, folks, because that is something that I've learned is that he and I do not agree on nearly anything. So anyways, just to get that out there. But Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, 1984 Japanese anime written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki based on his 1982 manga, which Harry has not read. Just want to say.
I know.
Yeah, and the Japanese is Kaze no Tani no Naoshika.
Hmm.
And let's see here. Okay. Plot. A millennium has passed since the A millennium has sorry. A millennium has passed since the catastrophic nuclear war named the 7 Days of Fire, which destroyed nearly all life on Earth. Humanity now lives in a constant struggle against the treacherous jungle that has evolved in response to the destruction caused by mankind. Filled with poisonous spores, hashtag Last of Us, and enormous and enormous insects, the jungle spreads rapidly across the earth and threatens to swallow the remnants of the human race. Away from the jungle exists a peaceful farming kingdom known as the Valley of the Wind, whose placement by the sea frees it from the spread of the jungle's deadly toxins. The valley's charismatic young princess Nausicaa finds her tranquil kingdom disturbed when an airship from the kingdom of the Tolmekia crashes violently in the valley. After Nausicaa and the citizens of the valley find a sinister pulsating object in the wreckage, the valley is suddenly invaded by the Tolmekian military, who intend to revive a dangerous weapon from the 7 Days of Fire. Now Nausicaa must fight to stop the Tomekians from plunging the earth into a cataclysm which humanity could never survive, while also protecting the valley from the encroaching forces of the toxic jungle. And I have to say, in that synopsis, ohms are not mentioned, which I think after the break, I have
Ooh.
to get my ohm. I forgot I should have had my
Yes.
ohm back here showing it off. But this is, oh, and ohms are the creatures that you see on that poster there. And we find out that Nausicaa has a history with ohms, and she does care for them. She knows what angers them. She tries to calm them, and not only destroying the jungle, but the Tomekian leader wants to use this weapon of mass destruction to kill all the ohms as well, and they're all coming for it. Golly, so this is one of those films that I cannot watch repeatedly because
Mm.
it is just it has a weight. It has a weight to it. And so whenever I watch it, I kind of have to sit with what I've seen. It's not like a jovial film that I'm like, "Yay, look at how cute that is," because there's just some heavy stuff that's going on. It's definitely anti-war, anti-weapon mass destruction, pro-environment, and, yeah, where do we even begin? I mean, luckily, you love this, as much as I guess you love it more than I do, but Nausicaa is just such a compelling main character for me and a female, character. I love her heart, I guess, to put it quite simply, just how she is living in this world that's really tough to live in, but she's also trying to protect it, even though the world itself is trying to inadvertently kill the humans. And she is, I would say, similar to an Ohm. She has that one really brutal moment after her father is killed, and
Mhm.
she unleashes hellish fury on everyone. And it's like the Ohms when they go red. And then of course she has to calm down. And I think it's that moment she realizes, like, oh man, what had I become at that moment? And I think there's a big shift after that. And then she becomes a hostage and is is then carried away, and she's gotta figure out what to do to save everyone while there are all these people in tow. There is a man here in this that could be a potential love interest, but just like Mononoke, I'm like, "Pish posh, I don't care about you, I just care about Nausicaa." But she ends up what's really interesting is there's this prophecy of this prince in blue that's, going to save them, and everyone, is looking, "Who's this prince? Who's this prince?" And as is, I guess Ghibli and Miyazaki subverts what you would expect that it would be a man, and it happened. It's Nausicaa. I mean, you kind of think like it should have been Nausicaa all along. How could people even believe for an instant that it was somebody else? But she sacrifices herself. She saves this little baby Ohm, and then that doesn't turn the ohms around. She ends up like throwing her body in there, and she's the horrifying scene of her and the baby ohm just like flying up into the air.
Ugh.
And then it looks like she's dead, but then the ohm gather around her and I guess give their life force to her and heal her. But I love the fact that that isn't a surprise because it's almost like within her because you see a flashback. There's this song that kind of plays a lot, which I think I said at one point, like this song could be annoying if it went on, multiple times. La 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 la. If that happened more than it did, I think I would have been like, okay, enough with that. But you see as a child how she was protecting a small baby Ohm, and these people came and was like, you don't, that's dangerous, don't do that. So it's just from the very beginning that it's seeded almost in her DNA how caring she is and just such a great leader. I think motivate character motivations besides Nausicaa, something that we had to work out a bit, especially the legless, armless wonder, as I call her. I can't
Yeah.
remember her name, because she has a change of heart, but then her comrade doesn't really. But there's clearly a war between these two groups that are going on. There was a princess that was stolen, and then the Valley of the Wind kind of gets caught up in the middle, unfortunately. But yeah, just really powerful. And some of these themes that we do see in Mononoke, I think, are really more successful here with this anti-war and pro environmentalist messages. But I guess I'll say my that was my piece. So now I will give you I'll give you the floor since it was your number 2.
Yes, I apologize for having hijacked the the
No,
intricate
that's okay.
planning.
I wondered when I knew yours, I was like, "Oh, what's this gonna do?" Because I know Nausicaa's on my list. How are we gonna do it? But here we are.
Here we are, unfortunately. I mean, how could it not be Nausicaa? I mean, this is such a beloved movie for a lot of people because it was so early on. And looking at it in the greater context of Studio Ghibli, it's interesting because aside from Princess Mononoke and the directly following Castle in the Sky, they would never really make a movie like this again.
Hmm.
This is an outright, like, big adventure fantasy world, and there's a lot of like those classical world building elements. It feels more like a science fiction or a fantasy movie than like a what became a sort of Ghibli approach. And I think that they maybe learned a lot about storytelling and how to make a film with this movie. And so you get a lot of refinement later on aesthetically. I think with Princess Mononoke, and then even just how you do an adventure story like in Arrietty, where it's just smaller scale but the same sort of emotions and suspense and everything like that. And maybe it just feels a bit more confident, and certainly the storytelling is more concise. And also because a bit all over the place because it's an adaptation of again an enormous manga that is that goes some strange places. But I mean, it's just such a big story and such a big world now condensed into a roughly 2 hour movie, and I think it's pretty successful, despite how that might sound. Um, yeah, anchored by this incredible character who feels as sort of rounded as the world itself because she does have that incredible scene of violence early on, but her character is not introduced because she's introduced in that scene where she's warding off the Ohm attack. But one of the great scenes is when she's introduced to this little creature, this sort of fox squirrel or something, which you also see in Castle in the Sky, and you get a sense that she is sort of one with nature because it starts to run around her and bites her finger, and she just sort of holds there until it realizes that she's not a threat. And that's just like a really small, really nice moment. And then she runs over to the chocobos and they lick her face with their
Chocobos.
giant, gross tongues. So yeah, again, like Nausicaa, Castle in the Sky, very influential on video games, especially, and I think Japanese pop culture in general, introducing a lot of things that would surface later in things like Final Fantasy and probably Dragon Quest. So very, very important movie, very entertaining. And yeah, that central message I think works better here than it does in Mononoke, which was somewhat incoherent. And in this case, like it's this big political struggle, and there's war, and there's a god that actually shows up and starts blasting things with lasers. So it goes some places, and in retrospect feels um, pretty unusual in the overall Ghibli canon, despite being pre-Ghibli and sort of the foundation. And I guess shout out to our friend Donovan. This is where Hideaki Anno got his start, animating the God Warrior sequence, and that would become surprisingly another icon for Ghibli. There was a live action thing, short film produced, I think, in 2014, maybe, probably by Shinji Higuchi, which was God Warrior Attacks Tokyo, and it was one of these God Warrior characters from Nausicaa invading Tokyo, and it looks like Shin Godzilla, but Hideaki Anno is the guy who eventually created Evangelion and Studio Gainax, and this is where he got his start. And if you end up talking about The Wind Rises, he is the voice of the main character in the original Japanese language. That's my nerd facts.
Thank you, Mr. Nerd. I will say that even though there's sorry, there's a haze on the animation, like it's not as clean or clear as we would expect now in 2021.
Mhm.
I think that this ages really well. Like I would not want them
Yeah.
to redo it and have the clean. I think that haze is almost representative of like the toxic fog that's around there.
Mm.
Do you feel like it
Interesting.
ages well, or would you prefer to have, if just like a clearer, brighter tones that they would use for
I,
20?
I I wouldn't object to seeing a new and updated version. I know that that is sort of a heresy, but I think that there is a certain like with video games. I think the best looking video games are the ones that have a really strong art style. So it's not necessarily about graphics because when the new generation comes in, the last generation suddenly looks awful, and you're amazed by how your eyes were tricked. But games like Metroid Prime or some of the Metal Gear Solids, Halo 3, Resident Evil 5, these games still look absolutely incredible, and there is just a certain I don't know, I don't want to say competence, but a certain level of artistry behind it. And in Nausicaa, like it is just very well designed, very well thought out. The way that you can sort of differentiate between the different cultures, and so I think that that's why it's still, or that's part of why it still holds up. Maybe I would like to see that rendered with some digital assistance, and how cool could it be? Because a lot of it is kind of deserty and barren, in keeping with the plot, which is post-apocalyptic. Um, but yeah, I don't know. This movie has one of those deep frames that I was talking about, especially in the beginning where you enter into this forest and you have these sky creatures just sort of floating by, and it just creates a very interesting, and honestly indelible image.
Any other thoughts on Nausicaa?
um, Hmm. I mean, this one is a bona fide classic, and I think it's easily recommended even for non-anime fans. I think it's an essential science fiction movie. So this is a easy recommendation.
I That's interesting, whether I would recommend this to somebody or not. I would need to know them and their proclivities,
Hmm.
because I don't know if I would necessarily, if they were a first time anime watcher, if I would go for this right away.
What about Donovan?
Oh yes, I think you should.
Okay,
Yeah. So that was an
we'll
easy one.
see. That's
Okay, so we're going to take a video break. And when we come back, we'll do, I guess, my two and then our ones.
right.
Okie dokie. I have to. Sorry. Why can't I? Guess I have to stop the share before I stop recording.
Oh, weird.
Okay. Recording. Stop.